Democrats in the American Joint Economic Committee have released a report raising concerns about declining Canadian visitors due, they say, to President Donald Trump's actions. The report says the negative impacts of President Trump's tariff policies have been particularly stark in states along the U.S.-Canada border, which have many businesses that rely on short-term visits by Canadians. Like in Maine, where U.S. Customs and Border Protection is reporting a nearly 20% drop in border crossings in 2025 compared with the same time last year.
Canada is a small percentage of our overall visitors, but it has a disproportionate impact on some of these communities.
The Democrats in the committee also cited a decrease in passengers on the Cat Ferry between Yarmouth, Nova Scotia and Bar Harbor, Maine. Last July, it reported an almost 20% drop in business over the summer. Yarmouth's mayor says President Trump's policies have played a role.
98% of what's happening is a result of that. I think it's obvious here anyway.
But Mood hasn't noticed a dip in U.S. visitors coming to Yarmouth.
They came in droves.
And this isn't the first time a Democrat raised concerns about President Trump's trade policies impacting border states. Last June, Maine Governor Janet Mills visited New Brunswick Premier Susan Holt in an attempt to improve relations between her state and the province.
The small businesses whose families come from New Brunswick, whose families come from Quebec, those small businesses are the ones who are being hurt right now.
According to the report, last year, Canadian tourism contributed $20.5 million to the U.S. economy and supported 140,000 jobs. Anna Mandan, Global News, Fredericton.
These are not politically motivated statements coming from Canada. It is U.S. lawmakers in Washington themselves who are now confirming the real and measurable losses that have already occurred. In border states such as Maine, the number of visitors from Canada has fallen by nearly 20%. Ferry routes are running with fewer passengers, and small towns that depend on Canadian spending are among those being hit the hardest. The cause of this situation is now unmistakably clear. Donald Trump's tariffs and confrontational approach to trade with Canada have produced direct and tangible consequences. This stands as evidence of a failed policy, one in which the country's closest ally has been turned into its own largest source of economic harm. From that point on, the story moved well beyond tourism. Canada did not respond in panic or with hasty reactive measures. Instead, Ottawa chose a deliberate and calculated course. When treated as a partner that could be sidelined, Canada decided to strengthen its own economic autonomy, and that choice has now been formally established. This is not merely a symbolic gesture, but a structural shift. For the first time, Canada is actively using federal government procurement as an economic tool. The policy is designed to serve domestic interests directly. Public spending prioritizes Canadian firms, favors domestic inputs, and places Canadian workers at the forefront. The United States is no longer assumed to be the default partner. Canada is becoming its own most important customer, and this shift alone is sufficient to reshape the entire bilateral trade relationship.
Our government has been clear. It's time to build, and we're making generational investments to build things right here at home. We are guided by new strategies around things like critical minerals, defense spending, high-speed rail, and housing construction. But it's not just what we build, it matters how we build. And importantly, we're building Canadian. That's why I'm glad to be here to announce the next step of our Buy Canadian policy. Because Canada needs to be its own best customer. When the federal government spends, we will prioritize companies and the use of Canadian materials. This is a big shift in how government operates, and we're doing it to maximize the use of public dollars to strengthen domestic supply chains, build industrial capacity, and support local businesses and jobs. Today, I'm announcing that our Buy Canadian policy is coming into force. Starting today, the Buy Canadian policy delivers two clear actions. First, Canadian suppliers and Canadian content are prioritized in strategic federal procurements. This applies immediately to contracts valued at $25 million and over, but the policy will expand to contracts valued at $5 million and over by the spring of 2026. In other words, companies with a real footprint in Canada, those that invest here, employ Canadians, and innovate domestically will receive a clear advantage when they bid on federal contracts. Second, effective today, large federal construction and defense projects valued at $25 million or more will be required to use Canadian-produced steel, aluminum, and wood products where a domestic supply is available. These materials must be manufactured or processed in Canada, not just sold by distributors, so as to ensure that federal projects genuinely drive demand for Canadian-made material. This new policy applies across federal departments and agencies and will apply to Crown corporations and grants and contribution programs of the federal government. With Buy Canadian, we are fully leveraging public procurement as an economic development tool, strengthening supply chains, supporting jobs, and helping Canadian businesses compete globally.
What makes this period truly pivotal is that the slogan Buy Canadian is no longer confined to a social call or a public campaign. It has now been elevated to an official government direction. Large-scale federal contracts, ranging from defense and infrastructure to steel, aluminum, and lumber, are being structured to prioritize domestic producers, not merely in principle, but through clear legal and regulatory requirements. This means that imports from the United States will narrow, domestic supply chains will be more firmly reinforced, and a decisive signal will be sent to Washington. Canada will no longer place itself in a position of economic vulnerability.
We will build Canadian by becoming our own best customer. With our new Buy Canadian policy, whenever the federal government spends, we will select Canadian suppliers by default, rather than using the current best efforts approach. And this new approach will extend to all federal agencies, all Crown corporations, such as Build Canada Homes, such as Alto, High-Speed Rail, and such as our spending from our new Defense Investment Agency.
It is at this moment that the direction pursued by Prime Minister Mark Carney